And as I'll keep an eye on the attendee numbers, and then once it seems like, it'll probably be a few minutes after 12, but once it seems like they're leveling off, I'll get things started here.
All right.
Great. Well, Lauren, if you're ready, I think we'll go ahead and get started here.
Sounds good.
Okay, good. Well, welcome everyone to the April 2021 Minnesota Climate Adaptation Partnership webinar. I think I've introduced myself to many of you, but for those of you I don't know, My name is Joel Larson, and I'm the Associate Director at the Water Resources Center here at the University of Minnesota. Today we are joined by Lauren Jensen, but before I introduce her and turn things over, I wanted to share a few logistical announcements. For the webinar, Lauren will talk for about 30 to 45 minutes, and we will spend the remainder of the time in a Q&A session. All participants right now are muted, but you can ask your questions in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can also see other questions and upvote those that you would like to see asked. We are recording this webinar and are planning to post it online on the WRC's YouTube page, and we'll share links to that through the MCAP email list. And then at the end of the webinar, you'll be directed to a brief evaluation of today's presentation. Your feedback is really helpful to inform us about other webinar topics and also ensure that we're providing you all with the best information that we can about climate adaptation across the state and with our partners. So please take a few minutes at the end of the webinar to answer those questions. So with that out of the way, we'll turn things over to the good stuff, the reason that you all joined us here. It's my pleasure to introduce Lauren Jensen, who will be talking about equitable engagement, a novel approach to community participation. Lauren graduated from the University of Minnesota in 2016 with a degree in human resources, looking to pursue her passion for the environment and sustainability. She went on to complete two 11-month AmeriCorps service terms, one in San Jose, California, with an urban forestry nonprofit, and the other back here in Minnesota in Winona, focused on stormwater. Both programs focused heavily on building community resilience through education and engagement. And from there, she went on to work with Clean Water Action Minnesota for a year as a program organizer for the Field to Fork campaign before she accepted her current role as the sustainability coordinator with the city of Rochester. Rochester's Sustainability and Resilience Task Force received this year's the 2021 Minnesota Climate Adaptation Award in the partnership category. And so we are very excited to have Lauren here to talk more about their work. So Lauren, at this point, I will turn things over to you, and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, Joel. It was an honor to receive that presentation or that award earlier this year on behalf of our whole task force, and an exciting opportunity today to be able to share this process more broadly. Pull up the presentation here. So as Joel's mentioned, this is equitable engagement, a novel approach to community participation. I'm going to start talking about here really what we set out to do. And then I have a few case studies, our task force being one, and a community co-design project in Rochester being another, followed up by some lessons learned and kind of what we gained throughout this process. So the first kind of iteration of this was our discovery co-design process, and that's through the Destination Medical Center Economic Development Agency. But really what we wanted to do was build equity into community engagement. So we realized that historically in the past, most of our engagement processes for the government were typically an open house style of sorts, usually in the same location, offered at similar times of the day. So in order to prioritize the involvement of community members who are most heavily impacted by our planning efforts and who are historically not heard of, we wanted to embark on a different type of engagement process. So this quote here just shows that cities have the capability of providing something for everybody, only because and only when they are created by everybody. So why is this so important? Crises, planning efforts, programs, projects, etc., typically disproportionately impact the community. In other words, some have more to gain than others. That kind of go back to that quote on the previous slide, where if we're developing things that are best for those most impacted, it's better for the greater good as a whole. These kind of slides here just show a few examples, particularly with Hurricane Katrina. On the whole, minorities and the poor had disproportionate burnt of the storm's impacts. And that was really due because those communities shared a common history of discrimination in settlement and other living conditions that made them more vulnerable. A more recent example would be the disproportional impacts of COVID-19 in Minnesota. Again, the shocks to our community have been disproportionate. We have seen that communities of color have applied for unemployment benefits and continue to need those benefits at a higher rate. Again, with the death incidences, it's a higher rate for those that are Indigenous, Black, and Latino individuals versus the rest of the United States. So how did we do this? Equitable engagement, our design process, we kind of borrowed some examples from across the US and then refined them to Rochester through our City and Community for Health Steering Committee. So there's a variety of different partner organizations in our community that kind of helped review these examples and create something that was unique to Rochester. It was customizable to the projects that we're embarking on and allowed for continuous improvement for each project. So one example was the city of Fort Collins. That's where we borrowed our stakeholder mapping analysis, as well as several other examples that we found through the United Urban Sustainability Directors Network. This just kind of shows on the left-hand side what traditional engagement approaches have looked like versus what an equitable engagement approach would look like. So the community is expected to volunteer perspectives and lived experiences versus an equitable approach where the community is compensated as partners. A traditional approach focuses on the number of engagements. And even now we see that in the city of, especially city council members and higher up wanting to know the number. But really equitable engagement focuses on the depth of those engagements and what we're really capturing out of that process. Again, traditional engagement facilitates conversations for a single event or project, but an equitable engagement process facilitates longer lasting relationships. So this again just kind of shows the differences in how those processes can look. Barriers that equitable engagement attempts to address. So some of the community barriers are power differential in decision making, the existing community networks, the overvalue of learned experience, a lack of lived experience to inform policy, program, and project design, and overall distrust of government and public processes. Participation barriers include lost wages if you're leaving work or taking time off to participate, language barriers, whether that be translation or interpretation, meeting locations, where they're being held, are we meeting people where they're at, speak for the community or tokenism, transportation availability and costs. Again, this ties into the meeting location. Is it accessible? Are people able to get there through our local transportation routes? Is it cost effective? Same with childcare. Again, if you're taking off time or you're looking to participate, do you have childcare available? And is that a cost prohibitive barrier? And then the time of day. So are you setting yourself up for success? So really the designers and the agency participation is the first part of it. Does the project timeline allow for this type of approach? So making sure from the start that you have the time built in to allow for this type of community engagement process. Are the resources in place for the participants to be compensated and to implement the outcomes that are developed throughout the process? Will the underserved be positively impacted by the project, program, or policy? So thinking about that from the start and having that in mind as you embark through the process. And then really ensuring that the participants themselves are driving the agenda and the discussion. So you can see this little graph over here, increasing impact on the decision. We're really aiming to empower and collaborate. So to place that final decision making in the hands of the public and the participants, and then partnering with them in collaboration to be included in that decision and the development of the alternatives and solution. So typically in other processes, those ones below here, it would be just informing or consulting. but we want to take it to that next step through collaboration and empowerment. So this was kind of where we started, and you'll see this again in both of the kind of case studies that I'll share, but the stakeholder power and analysis really allowed us to review who was most impacted by the project and who currently has the most influence in the process or the implementation. So you can see on this matrix here, we have 4 different quadrants. Those that are highly impacted but have the lowest amount of influence is really kind of our key bucket there. We want to make sure that we're including those in our community that fall in that area. And then again, partnering and pairing those through this process with those that have higher influence in the community. So that's kind of that upper right-hand bucket there. And those are really kind of your sweet spot for what you're looking for in your project participation. So our first case study here is the Discovery Walk co-design, and this was our first kind of example or really experience with a process like this. And again, this was through the Destination Medical Center Economic Development Agency. The city partners heavily with them on much of our sustainability work. So this first project, Discovery Walk, is a 4-block linear parkway in downtown Rochester along our 2nd Avenue that will serve pedestrians as well as vehicle traffic. The multi-purpose public space is the first, and streetscape is the first of its kind in Rochester. And the vision for this project was to create a high amenity landscape road and utility reconstruction project in the middle of downtown that prioritizes pedestrian experience while also maintaining flexibility for bike and vehicular access, civic events, and would support future development. So currently you can see the reality. This road is pretty much just parking space. There's not a lot of greenery. It's lined by a lot of office buildings. So the aspiration is to make this more of a public realm that has greenery, activities, places for people to congregate, really pedestrian focused. And you can kind of see that reflected here in the design. So again, this is just another look at that stakeholder power mapping analysis. This is really where we started for this project. So who is highly impacted in our community but doesn't necessarily have influence, and who has the high influence. So for us particularly, that's city departments, Mayo Clinic, Olmsted Medical Center, the county, Rochester Public Utilities, different nonprofits and community organizations such as Channel One or our neighbors are typically those that have the more influence. And then our highly impacted and low influence was many of those marginalized communities, minority-owned businesses, those with chronic health conditions, the LGBTQ plus community, transit-dependent riders, youth and college students kind of fit into that bucket there. So how did we approach equitable engagement for the Discovery Walk? It started with the project team. So they're really in charge of facilitating this co-design process and ensuring the outcomes of the co-design process are translated into meaningful design interventions. Those participants include the design team themselves. We actually utilized a few local artists to be a part of that design team. And then it also includes the consultant or the project team members that are kind of in charge of managing this effort. It includes the community partners. So those organizations that we worked with to design this process and continually to check in with to offer feedback and insight throughout the design. They're also critical in identifying the community co-designers within their trusted networks. So again, those include our community organizations, both public and private, as well as local and regional governmental agencies. And then finally, we have the community co-designers. So they offer feedback and insight on the project. I must have missed that there. But again, they're also critical in identifying the co-designers or other people in the community through their networks. So those participants include the individuals that self-identify across a diversity of communities. So that includes geographically, culturally, generationally, ability-wise, etc. So this just shows some of the participants from the Discovery Walk co-design process and what they identified with in the community. So we have a Rochester Public Schools equity specialist, Krista, who connected to communities with mobility challenges. We had a local high school student, someone from our community health service, someone with connections to communities dealing with brain injuries. So really just a wide variety of not only age, but background, cultures, and kind of the role they hold within the community. This here kind of shows the project sequence. So the expected community member time commitment for the project was around 18 hours. So the kickoff here was the first design studio, and really the point of that was just to get to know each other and build familiarity with the project team, and the timeline. And then participants spend time learning and practicing some of the human-centered design tools and processes that we'll be using throughout this process. So it involved 3 studios. These were objectives to collectively interpret the information and data, co-develop and test the solutions and the concepts, and then work with the decision makers and community leaders to translate that vision into action. These were in-person or virtual workshops that were meant for sharing what the participants have learned through the previous sprints, synthesizing that feedback, and then co-developing the next steps. The sprints themselves, the objectives there were to explore the questions, ideas, and community input that arises during the in-person studios. And then it's opportunity for the co-designers to have conversations within their own communities that aren't typically accessible to the designers or the agencies involved. And then this is time to generate questions and insights and ideas to share. Then you can also see there were office hours held at different sequences. These just gave the co-designers opportunity to connect with the facilitators, ask any questions, check in on progress, things like that, just kind of keeping that open door throughout the process. So these were the questions that they asked of the co-designers for the Discovery Walk project. A lot of them are really kept open-ended for a reason, and that's to really connect people's lived authentic experiences, whatever that may be to them. We also have a few where we had options for probing. So, I mean, really the concept here is to listen and take notes and really prompt them, be curious, ask further questions to really find out, you know, what, if these answers are different, what do you think it is? Why is this the case? And how might it better support, you know, certain, for this example, mental health or connectedness. So really kind of trying to discover what their barriers are, what they've typically found to be the best support in the past, and really what makes them feel their best. Some tips for the co-designers as they go through this process. Really the intent is to stimulate stories and ideas from the participant, not to go just get through the list of questions. So again, allowing for silence, giving them time to think, not focusing on the solutions during this aspect of the process, but asking those follow-up questions to really dig deeper. Paying attention to their nonverbal cues throughout the process is important, and really just being present. You don't need a transcript of the conversation, really just the most important ideas and comments that arose during the conversation. So what did we learn in this first process? Really, we focused on spatial. So how does the park look when it is designed versus when it's utilized? Programmatic, how might the park function? And then policy, so do the rules and regulations support healthy interactions and spaces? So beginning with the spatial elements, some of the insight that came out of this community engagement process was really wanting access to year-round function. A lot of the diverse communities in Rochester come from warmer places in the world. And so wintertime is a big adjustment, and having an opportunity to really kind of connect to that or maybe be outside, but in a space that facilitates, you know, more use throughout the wintertime. Warmth and light, again, was a big one. Access to nature and cultural plants, spaces for healing and reflection, accessibility and universal design, as well as space for activity. Programmatically, what the co-designers and their communities came up with was just really being broadly welcoming. So more signage in multiple languages, flags and colors representative of our diverse communities, native plantings to the different global locations, games and programs native to diversity of cultures, free Wi-Fi and charging stations, really friendship and connection pieces in the park. So interactive elements, places that allow people to kind of group and then offer multi-generational activities as well. And really just making the space dynamic, ensuring there are elements to safety, and just connections to overall citywide health efforts. From the policy perspective, what folks were really looking for was, is it affordable and accessible? Typically right now there are lower rates for cultural events and holidays. So highlighting and incorporating those into the space. Reduced event fees for any events that might be hosted within the space, and immediately accessible parking. Again, community participation, non-smoking in the area, year-round accessibility, cultural connectivity, and the role of alcohol at public events was a particular piece that came up for other cultures and religions, and just how, and even just broadly across the age ranges, how people feel comfortable in participating at events when there's alcohol around. So our next case study here is our Sustainability and Resiliency Task Force. So this again is going to dive in a little bit deeper to the specific project that I've worked on the past year and what we received our award for earlier this year. So the mission and purpose of this group was to develop a sustainability plan for the Rochester community, to really guide the mayor and the city in adopting and modifying policies, services, and practices that help meet the city's social, economic, and environmental goals, to broaden the city's definition of sustainability and resiliency, and to create goals and metrics that shine a light on environmental justice. So really this was administered by the mayor to put together this group to really help Rochester build out our definition of sustainability, really focusing that it's not just the environmental aspects, but those social and economic pieces that need to be incorporated to be truly sustainable. And helping our city and our community really define what that looks like for us based on our lived experiences. So again, we started with a stakeholder power mapping analysis. This is how we developed our task force membership and how we decided our community engagement, which we refer to as community listening in this process later on. So we looked again, pairing those that are highly impacted with low influence to those in our community with high influence. So our task force membership is just over 45 members, and 28% of that is people of color, which is pretty remarkable considering that Rochester is 80% white. So we were able to achieve a higher percentage of diverse participants than what is reflected in the Rochester community for our task force membership. And then again, it's folks from local organizations and nonprofits, Mayo Clinic, the city, the county, just well-known community members who are kind of leaders and represent their communities who are participating in this process. And then those who weren't reflected in the membership is who we prioritize further when it came to the community engagement portion of this process. So the task force versus the community roles, really the task force is set up to provide their expertise on the actionable strategies in this plan based on the community input that we received. So they're the ones that are setting the goals for progress, determining what accountability looks like for this plan, and a really important piece in the implementation of the plan moving forward. They're kind of like leaders in the community to get this out there and get people excited about it. And then they're really important in nurturing partnerships to advance kind of other relevant initiatives as we move forward. The wider community is there to share their lived experiences as residents, articulate their personal or their community priorities for city action, and to hopefully endorse the plan as representatives of their community vision. So really all of that input there from the wider community was brought back to the task force here to develop this plan. So this just is a little example. If through our community engagement and the lived experiences, we're hearing that there are high energy bills or heat waves are a problem, that's the input that goes back to the task force. The task force develops recommendations like local cooling stations. A key part of this process is bringing our draft plan back to those community members we originally met with to kind of complete that feedback loop and make sure they see their input represented and they have the opportunity to review the plan and provide any input before it goes forward to City Council for an approved community plan. So for developing this listening plan and really our engagement process, we have our draft plan. We brought that to the larger task force for feedback on the engagement piece. We took their feedback and we created a smaller working group of task force members to further kind of hash out this engagement plan and what we wanted it to look like. We met with our local diversity council as well as the Intercultural Mutual Assistance Association in Rochester to get their input on the engagement plan. We really wanted to make sure that what we were asking translated across not only language-wise, but across cultures as well, so that it was relevant to the folks that we would be meeting with and made sense to them. And really that's kind of everything that went into developing this final community listening plan. So these were the specific questions that we asked in our sessions. We held 37 sessions and we utilized task force members' relationships within the community to further identify other key voices to meet with to get this input. So again, the questions were kept really kind of open-ended and broad to capture, you know, whatever they are feeling. How would they define the community? What do they think would make it a great place to live for future generations? We talked about the 5 focus areas of the plan. So that's climate change resilience, resilient economy, accessible transportation, city for health, and vibrant neighborhoods. And so asking them what was important to them of those areas and were we missing anything in the plan? So this shows the different groups and individuals that we met with in these listening sessions. As I said, we held 37 of those, and within the 37, we met with around 110 community members. So you can see we had representatives from our local Cambodian, Hmong, Sudanese, Hispanic, BIPOC, and Indian communities, Somali, seniors, various neighborhood groups. We met with groups from Mayo Clinic, Rochester Public Schools, Family Service Rochester, a local nonprofit, the Indian Cultural Association of Minnesota, different commissions. So just a wide variety of groups representing different cultures, as well as different organizations and ages. And then this kind of shows the needs and the key themes that came out of those conversations. So affordable housing and living wages was a big one across the board, as well as community resources. So a lot of people just wanting kind of a centralized community resource center, better communication and translation of city resources, and really the knowledge of how and where to access them. So just because we're translating our resources that are available as a city doesn't mean that folks are still able to access them or engage with them in the right way. Better education systems, support for small businesses, accessible transportation, not only in how the services are accessible themselves to folks, but are the routes accessible? Are the times? Is it costly? Is it affordable for those to use it? Cultural activities and community events was another really big one. So wanting to just see kind of more of that diversity across the board when it comes to what's offered in the community and the opportunity for community members to just connect and interact with each other. So diversity and representation across the board, whether that be in our businesses that are in town, the local government, who sits on boards and commissions, who we see in our school systems. That was another big one, as well as just equity was a key theme. So just addressing the racial and economic disparities in our community, really building a culture around equity and inclusivity, providing equal opportunity, and really creating a trusting and welcoming community. And so not only have we used this input and these key needs for this process, but it's now data that we have and are already putting to use in other processes that we're embarking now as the city. So we've used it to help inform other grant applications. We've shared it with other departments as it pertains to their work and the projects they're embarking on. So it's really become really a key piece and data set for us. So what was gained in this process? A deeper level of engagement with communities. So this can't be replicated in an open house, just, picking one location, picking one time and expecting people to come to you. We really took the time to meet people where they were at, and just listen and engage with them. And it showed in a lot of the sessions that we had. People were very appreciative of just having the opportunity to sit down and share and just talk about their experience as a community member. And they were really, really receptive to the fact that we want to bring this back to them when the plan is complete, so that they have the opportunity to review it and ask questions. Again, using the representatives from the task force to connect broader with the community. They really need to be trusted by the community. Having those task force members to kind of create those introductions and facilitate the initial relationship building, helped those community members open up and us to capture a deeper level of input. And then really helps build accountability and trust into the process, as well as moving forward for the city and our residents. Again, community cultural diversity and inclusivity competency. So this really built competency in the public process engagement and understanding. So because we're interacting with people who don't typically involve in these processes, we're just opening that door for broader understanding. Learnings live beyond the project and have broad relevance. So as I mentioned, we're using this already in other spaces and other projects. This can't be done by a government employee or professionals. It really is a process that needs to involve trusted community members. And it's really an effective and efficient form of engagement. Again, it's not always about the quantity, but the quality. So it may take more time to have these sit down sessions, and you may meet with a smaller amount of people than if you were to just put out a survey. We did also put out a survey that received 170 responses, but those were largely in English and from the typical demographic that we would normally hear from. So while we only had 37 listening sessions, the quantity of input that we received from the community was a lot greater and broader. And then finally, unique project insights that we gained. The lived experiences of our residents can't really be accessed without directly engaging those who are living it. You need to hear their stories and perspectives, and engaging underrepresented perspectives can offer new and creative design guidance. So it builds investment in the community. These relationships last beyond the project. It builds empathy and understanding. And really, this is an approach the community will desire moving forward. So the outcome is more inclusive and equitable projects, plans, and programs that are reflective of the Rochester community as a whole. Community capacity growth is another big one. So after participating in the Discovery Walk project, 2 of the co-designers actually accepted community racial equity focused positions. So one of those co-designers is actually now the City of Rochester's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Director. And this woman here, Wafa, accepted a position with the Rochester School District to work as an equity specialist. And her quote here is, she just wanted to let them know that one of the things that helped her with receiving this offer was being a part of the Discovery Walk project. And her new position will now allow her to devote more time to families and students from these underserved communities. all I have for today. If we want to open it up for questions here.
Great, Lauren, thank you very much for presenting. It was really great to hear. There's a question that I'll go ahead and ask, and if others have them, please add them to the Q&A here. But so from Mindy, who is doing some similar work up in Duluth, very inspiring. I'm wondering who participates or conducts the stakeholder mapping process. It seems like that is a critical first step. Is this done by city staff with community input or from a facilitator?
It's done by city staff with community input, really. So we partnered with the Diversity Council. We partnered with Olmsted County Public Health to kind of create that power mapping analysis and think of the key pieces that kind of fit in each of those quadrants. It really is mostly led by city staff. I know for our task force, it was us mostly who looked at that. But the key piece of it then too was, we had, while not all of those buckets within the analysis were met by task force members, we knew who we still needed to connect with them throughout the process too. So that was nice.
So another question, the 37 listening sessions in the second case study, were those all attended by the same leaders and facilitators? How is this balanced with other tasks?
So it was quite a process to plan and just do all of those listening sessions. Our project team consists of our consultants. So Center for Energy and Environment is kind of our consultants on this project. We have 2 to 3 of them that consistently meet with us and are guiding us through this process. And then myself and Kevin Bright. So he's our DMC representative. We both kind of represent the city and the DMC. But it was really Kevin, myself, and our intern who led all of those listening sessions. So it was a good month and a half of scheduling those. We didn't all meet for all of them, so we did divide and conquer depending on our schedules. But I have to say, for me, it was so worth it to just hear what people were saying and to hear those lived experiences. It was time consuming in that month of doing this, but I think one, it builds those relationships with communities. 2, I learned so much about our community and things that I didn't know, and perspectives that I wouldn't have thought of in certain things, so I think it's well worth the time that goes into it. It is a little bit more consuming than a typical process. But again, it was 110 people throughout those 37 listening sessions. And it was all virtual, which I think did make it a little easier because we didn't have to run around to a bunch of different places. We did do some in-person events, depending on the group and their needs and what worked best for them. But most of them were held via Zoom or Microsoft Teams. So that did make it a little bit easier, I think, to manage scheduling wise and just get more done.
Yeah, that's and maybe just a small follow-up on that, because that was one of my questions too, is if this was done virtually over the past year, what advice or thoughts would you have for folks that want to do something similar virtually, with the making sure that people have access to the equipment, kind of similar for physical space, but a different question.
Yeah, access to the equipment is a good one. We didn't, I guess, really run into that in our process. Like I said, for those that didn't really have access to it, we met them in person. To just avoid that, we just practiced social distancing guidelines and wore masks. So there were a few groups where, like, I met some local gardeners or farmers in the area. That was majority like our Hmong community who was represented there, as well as some other African countries. So I met them at their gardens to have that listening session. And we just sat down at picnic tables, and we had a translator there to help, because not everyone spoke English. And again, it's really just listening and taking notes as you go through those questions. There was some again, it helps with the task force members, though them kind of facilitating some of these engagements and helping to coordinate and organize them. So Family Service Rochester, we had a task force member there who really helped us meet with some of our lower income neighborhoods, as well as like a specific neighborhood, Hispanic neighborhood group and Somali group. And those we actually went to Family Service Rochester and hosted it in one of their bigger like meeting rooms because that was a space that was familiar to them. And not everyone does work virtually like that or through these kind of tools. So, you know, it was easier for them to just speak in person. And again, translators were needed for some of those as well. So I guess I'm not really sure how to get around the tools concept other than that we did still make accommodations to meet people in person.
So it looks like one of the questions is how did you overcome the barrier of distrust of government?
Again, that's really where our task force members played a key role. It wasn't myself or Kevin or our consultants reaching out to these community members asking to speak to us because we probably wouldn't have had the same response. Our task force members, you know, we built that task force specifically to have people who were trusted leaders within their sub communities in Rochester. And then really we relied on them to reach out to those groups and make that ask and facilitate that connection. And I think that really allowed us to meet with the groups that we did. And even the language barriers, you know, I don't Somali or Hispanic or the Hmong community, I don't speak any of those languages. I would have no idea how to interact or even reach out to them. So having those task force members facilitate that initial connection and even be there during the engagement process helped a lot. And I think now it's been a good step that they've met us through that process. So hopefully moving forward, you know, it was a first step to building that trust. Another thing just kind of off of that we heard in the beginning of this process from the task force itself was wanting to hear less from our consultants during our meetings. They really wanted to see Kevin and I kind of lead the meetings more. So that was something that we kind of took a step back and we spent an entire meeting 1 month just getting the task force feedback on our process to date so far, and then incorporating that feedback moving forward. So, you know, our consultants kind of took a step back and led Kevin and I in the process in the background so that we could focus more on engaging with the task force as the city representatives.
Kind of touching on what you raised a little bit in that last response, are you hearing from community members that they are overburdened with requests for engagement, or are they eager and appreciative of the opportunity to engage with multiple city efforts?
I think it's a little bit of both. So for sure, some of the members who are on our task force, they are community leaders, and so they are the ones that are always receiving these requests. And it was something that we heard from some of, they're happy to do it, but at the same time, they wish that others in their sub-communities kind of saw the same value in it. And it would help with some of that kind of engagement fatigue. Additionally, you know, some of the groups and the people that we met with in these listening sessions hadn't ever been a part of a government process before or didn't really ever feel like their voices were heard. So they were really appreciative to have this opportunity to actually sit down with someone from the city and just share their lived experience and their thoughts and ideas for our community moving forward. So I think it's a mix, and hopefully, again, by hosting these sessions and meeting with newer folks and showing them, you know, how easy this process can be and that we are really truly there to listen and implement this feedback, you know, hopefully others will start to kind of, it'll increase that empowerment within some of these other communities and hopefully get more people wanting to step up and speak. It's actually something we spoke about with our new diversity, equity, and inclusion director earlier this week was kind of that fatigue and, you know, how we're through these processes, are we building that empowerment in new community members to just feel like they can step up and speak to these things as well.
So in your experience, did engaging a diversity of community members lead to a wide diversity of needs or ideas or themes, or a convergence of those things?
I guess I would say, again, maybe a little bit of both, and maybe I don't understand the question directly, but you know, there were definitely unique pieces that came out of it. So for example, with the co-design process for Discovery Walk, there will be like little fountains or feet washing stations available, because some religions need like a prayer space or need to wash their feet before they enter a public space like that. Same with through one of the sessions we held with our Sustainability and Resiliency Action Plan. Again, from another diverse member of the community, we learned that women in like our recreational facilities can't exercise or swim if men are there at the same time. So just having like an hour set aside for the pool that's only for women, or exercise classes or time and space that's specifically available to women. So there were very key, like unique pieces particular to individuals and their culture or their religion. But then I think there were definitely like these high level needs of like affordable housing, diversity and representation, just having like an overall safe, welcoming community that really stuck out across the board in all of those. So it was a little bit of balance, bringing that back to the task force then to develop our strategies of, you know, what fits in where, and is it a full strategy? Is it maybe a tactic to a strategy? You know, what are really the overarching themes, and how do some of these other pieces feed into that?
Can you talk a little bit about where the approach originated? So kind of what was driving it early on? Was it community requests or something from the council or a grant?
It really kind of came from just us wanting to have better engagement with the community. So, you know, in 2017, at least for this Sustainability and Resiliency Action Plan, in 2017, we adopted our Energy Action Plan. We're 3 or 4 years into it, and we really didn't have any equity in the engagement or the implementation of that plan. It was largely developed by the city and consultants, and then it's an energy commission that kind of leads the charter of this plan and its implementation. And so with our new mayor really having to focus on climate, and the city itself trying to build out that 3-tiered approach to sustainability, where we're thinking about the economy and social equity as well, you know, we realized like our typical engagement process just didn't fit those pieces. And so with wanting to create this action plan, we wanted to make sure that we were accommodating that, and getting that social equity component into it, and really making a plan that was developed by the community. It kind of goes back to what I talked about in the beginning of the presentation, but we're including those voices and those people that are often left out or underrepresented. If it's better for those that are the most affected, then it can only be better for everyone else overall as well. So we kind of just, again, took examples from other communities. So Fort Collins, Colorado was where we got the stakeholder power mapping analysis. The USDN has really great resources on equitable engagement and workshops you can take. I think I shared some of those resources to be sent out to folks as kind of the background to how we created this process then.
Yep, I will put those in the chat here for folks that are interested. In the meantime, just a little kudos from Dawn. Great to know this is happening and recognized. And so then maybe to, I guess, to close things off, you know, this kind of process is going to be incredibly important as we're looking at climate change adaptation and responding to that, because the changes that are happening are going to continue to disproportionately impact people when you're looking back on this process, or as you're looking forward to other opportunities to do this, what are those key lessons that you think folks should take away, or tools, just a handful of things that you found really important, that you would want other people to know?
I think, one, just the involving community members is key, getting those voices involved, really meeting people where they at. I think we say that a lot, but we don't really always implement that, or take it to heart. So, really finding those trusted leaders and building those networks to create this process, and just listening. I think that was the biggest takeaway for me in this engagement process for this plan, was the opportunity to just hear different perspectives, and hear people's different experiences in our community. Like I said, we are already using it for so much more than just this project. But for me, it just really opened my eyes to so much more, and things that I think about now in other projects and other processes, to just apply that lens. I think this being one of the first projects when I started my position here with the city has really kind of given me that thought process and that lens in all of the work I do now. Are we thinking of these voices? Are we thinking of these different subsets of our community? I think that's probably the biggest takeaway is, even just embarking on a process like this once, I think just provides so much value to the community, and hopefully gets easier as you go. So.
Yeah, absolutely true. And you mentioned human-centered design at one point in your presentation, and I think that what you just said about good design, accessible design, regardless of the focus of that accessibility, accessible design is good design for everyone.
Yeah,
it's a great point.
And I think too, just to add to this, it can be tailored to your project. The discovery walk was, I think, around 10 co-designers that were specifically compensated for those studios. They received travel stipends and childcare stipends, and they were paid for their time at those sessions. Our task force is 45 plus people, and those are all volunteering their time. So we have 2-hour meetings once a month, and that's all volunteers. Some of the engagement groups we met with, we did offer compensation, and some of them took us up on that. But there are different ways of setting this up to meet the needs of one, the capacity that you have, but your community and the project specifically.
Great. And looks like one last comment here that came in. Can you talk a little bit about whether you incorporated mass transit in the plan and the redesign?
Yep. So I can't touch so much on the discovery walk co-design process because I actually wasn't, that was kicked off before I began my role. I attended one of the studios, but I know that it is in accordance with other mass transit projects that are happening, or just public transit projects that are happening in downtown Rochester. For the Sustainability and Resiliency Action Plan, one of our focus areas is accessible transportation. I do think it probably focuses more on locally our community and transportation, but it does heavily focus on public transportation, and building those out. I don't know, not so much regionally, but I know that's something we are thinking about, if that touches on that at all. There are specific strategies, so we're actually planning to hopefully release our draft summary of this action plan later this week, and that shows all of the strategies under each of the focus areas. So transportation is definitely a big one that was thought about in both of the projects, because there is a lot with our transit villages that we're setting up in Rochester, as well as we're embarking on a bus rapid transit line through downtown, as well as the circulator. And I believe the bus rapid transit is using a community co-design approach for that project as well.
Great. Well, Lauren, thank you again for coming and presenting on Rochester's work and your involvement in that and sharing that experience with us. I think it'll be very valuable to others who are doing that kind of work. So for the attendees that are on, if you do have a couple minutes, please fill out our brief evaluation. Our next webinar is going to be on May 18th. Also from 12 to 1, we'll send out information on the details of that with our MCAP email list. And in the meantime, Lauren, thank you again. And we will talk with you all and hopefully see you all at the next one.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.